May 2008. Kičevo, North Macedonia. The town is small, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbor's business. But a shadow has fallen over the elderly women of the region. They are being found in remote areas, discarded like trash, subjected to rituals of unspeakable cruelty. A veteran journalist named Vlado Taneski is the first on the scene, writing gripping, detailed articles for the national newspapers. His prose is haunting, his facts are impeccable, and his insights into the killer's mind are unparalleled. But as the police read his latest column, they noticed something impossible. Taneski has described a detail of the murder that only the killer and the lead investigator could possibly know. Welcome to the Well of Monsters. Vlado Taneski was a respected figure in North Macedonian journalism. With over 20 years of experience, he was a senior reporter for major newspapers like Nova Macedonia and Jutrinski Vesnik. To his colleagues, he was a quiet, unassuming man, perhaps a bit solitary, but deeply professional. He lived in Kičevo with his family, maintaining a reputation as a devoted son and a hardworking writer. Taneski specialized in crime reporting. He had a knack for getting the scoop, often arriving at crime scenes before the yellow tape was even stretched. He was the bridge between the police and the public, the man who gave the victims a voice. But beneath the professional exterior, Taneski was struggling. His relationship with his mother was notoriously strained, characterized by years of resentment and silence. He was a man living a life of quiet desperation, a veteran writer looking for the one story that would define his career. The terror began in 2003 with the disappearance of 64-year-old Mitra Simjanaska. Her body was found months later, discarded in an abandoned building. The cause of death was strangulation, but the body bore marks of extreme physical abuse. The police were baffled. Kičevo wasn't a place for serial killers. The case went cold, documented in the files as a random act of violence. Then, in 2007, 56-year-old Lyubika Likoska vanished. Her body was found near a local gas station, wrapped in plastic bags. The pattern was repeating: elderly women, manual laborers, strangled and abused. The town was gripped by fear. Vlado Taneski was there for every development, writing long, analytical pieces about the monster of Bitolia. He interviewed the families, he criticized the slow pace of the police investigation, and he became the face of the tragedy in the national media. As the bodies piled up, investigators began to notice a very specific profile. The victims were all elderly women who worked as cleaners. They were poor, unassuming, and lived alone. But the most chilling detail was discovered by a criminal profiler: all of the victims bore a striking physical resemblance to Vlado Taneski's mother, with whom he had shared a deeply toxic relationship until her death. Taneski's writing during this period became increasingly obsessive. He didn't just report the facts, he speculated on the killer's motivations. He wrote about the complex psychological trauma the killer must have faced. He was, in effect, writing a public diary of his own shadow. He was hiding his crimes in the one place no one would think to look, on the front page of the morning news. In May 2008, the body of Zvana Temilkoska was discovered. The murder was the most brutal yet. Taneski rushed to his typewriter and produced an article that would become his undoing. In the piece, he mentioned that the killer had used a specific type of telephone cord to bind the victim, a detail that the police had intentionally withheld from the public to verify future confessions. The lead investigators, reading the morning paper over coffee, froze. They checked their notes, then the evidence locker. The only people who knew about the telephone cord were the forensic team and the murderer. Suspicion immediately fell on the Star reporter. They began to wonder how Taneski was always the first on the scene, and why his articles seemed to possess an intimate, almost voyeuristic quality. The hunter of news was now the hunted of the law. The Macedonian police began a secret surveillance operation on Taneski. They looked into his movements on the nights of the disappearances. They found that despite his professional demeanor, he was often seen driving late at night in the areas where the bodies were later found. They also looked into his home life, discovering a man who was increasingly erratic and isolated. They decided to use a DNA test, a relatively new tool in the Macedonian legal system at the time. They collected biological samples from the crime scenes and compared them to a sample obtained from Taneski under the guise of a routine check. The results were a perfect match. The voice of the people was the one silencing them. On June 22, 2008, the police moved in. They arrested Vlado Taneski at his home in Kičevo. As they led him away, his neighbors watched in disbelief. They couldn't reconcile the man who wrote their news with the man being handcuffed. The newsroom at Nova Macedonia went silent as the wires reported the arrest of their own star correspondent. During the search of his house, police found trophies from the victims and the very typewriter he used to write about their deaths. It was a hall of mirrors, a crime scene that was also a workstation. Taneski had turned the act of murder into a literary exercise, using the lives of innocent women to fuel his career and his twisted psychological needs. Taneski's behavior in custody was as cold as his articles. He denied everything, maintained a professional distance, and spoke to the investigators as if he were still a reporter conducting an interview. He criticized their evidence and questioned their methods. He was a man who believed his intelligence and his mastery of language would protect him. He was charged with the murders of 3 women and was the prime suspect in a 4th. The prosecution prepared a case that was airtight, built on DNA and the fatal detail from his own articles. Taneski sat in his cell, realizing that the story he had spent 5 years writing was finally coming to its conclusion, and he was the one who was going to pay the price. The trial never happened. On June 23, 2008, just one day after his arrest, Vlado Taneski was found dead in his cell at the Kičevo prison. He had committed suicide in a manner that was as bizarre as his crimes. He had drowned himself in a plastic bucket of water. The guards found him during a routine check, slumped over the small container. The news of his death sparked a new wave of conspiracy theories. How could a man drown himself in a bucket? Was it a final act of control, or was he silenced by those who feared what he might reveal during a trial? The official autopsy confirmed it was suicide, but the mystery of his final moments added a layer of Southern Gothic horror to the already dark tale. Psychologists who studied the Taneski case were fascinated by his professional psychopathy. He was a man who used his career to rationalize his darkness. By writing about the crimes, he was able to revisit them, relive them, and taunt the authorities, all while maintaining a respectable social standing. He was the ultimate hidden killer, a man whose mask of sanity was his byline. His hatred for his mother was the driving engine of his violence. Each victim was a surrogate for the woman he couldn't kill or didn't kill. He was trapped in a cycle of repetition, using the women of Kičevo to play out a tragedy that had started in his childhood home. He was a man who literally wrote his way through his trauma, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. The Taneski case triggered a massive debate in the Balkan media. How could his editors have missed the signs? His articles were incredibly detailed. But in the rush for clicks and exclusive scoops, no one questioned why the reporter knew so much. The case became a cautionary tale for journalists everywhere about the dangers of the exclusive and the line between reporting and participating. The newspapers he worked for had to issue public apologies. They had unwittingly published the confessions of a serial killer for 5 years, presenting them as investigative journalism. The trust between the Macedonian public and the media was shattered, leaving a legacy of skepticism that still exists today. While the world focused on the killer journalist, the families of the victims were left in a state of double grief. Not only had they lost their mothers and grandmothers, but they had also been manipulated by the killer himself. Taneski had sat in their kitchens, drank their coffee, and listened to their tears, only to go home and write about their pain for the morning edition. The women, Mitra, Ljubica, and Zavana, were hard-working people who had lived through the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the birth of a new nation. They deserved a dignity that Taneski denied them in both life and death. Today, their names are often forgotten, buried beneath the sensationalism of the monster of Bitalya. Today, the town of Kičevo has tried to move on, but the story of Vlado Taneski is part of its permanent geography. The bucket suicide and the journalist killer are legends that have passed into the folklore of North Macedonia. It is a story that proves the most dangerous person is often the one who is telling the story. The well of monsters is deep, and Vlado Taneski sits near the bottom, a man who tried to write his own ending and found it in a bucket of water. He was the reporter who became the news, a man whose final deadline was his own. Subscribe, ring the bell, and thanks for watching. Don't forget. I'll see you at the bottom of the well.